My FPL Game Week 9 first transfer plans. Another week of FPL is almost over with one game still to go on Monday night if you own someone like Jarrod Bowen, potentially or Juve in defense. But my team is all out. Games are drawing to a close with 4 free transfers now and still a few issues in my team. Can I buy a striker who can finally score some goals that isn't called Erling Haaland, with João Pedro and Gyökeres continuing to be an issue for me? We've got midfielders like Stack not performing well. We've got Reinders who got taken off early. So it's not looking the best, but I do have 4 free transfers potentially to make some changes this week if I want to. What is up, everyone? FPL Harry here. Before we dive in, 2,000 likes is the aim. Subscribe if you are new around here. Apologies, the setup is slightly different, but let's dive in and go straight into the video. I'm recording as a bit of a timestamp about 20 minutes into the Liverpool versus Manchester United game, and Manchester United have taken an early lead in that. 1-0 to them, a Brian and Burmo goal. Unfortunately, it is not Bruno Fernandes, but at time recording, he's already on 4 defensive contributions, maybe an attacking return we could hope for in this game from him. But game week 8, let's talk about it. It's been an okay game week so far, and how someone like a Mo Salah does in the second half will really depend on how my game week goes in comparison to Bruno Fernandes. I'm basically on a completely flat arrow, but I have Bruno playing, but I don't have someone like a Mo Salah, I don't have a Van Dijk, and I don't have a Gakpo, who combined to have about 70% ownership still in and around my rank at about 1 million. So depending on how that goes will be whether I end up on a green arrow or a red arrow. Hopefully it can be green, especially given we didn't actually get many returns from some of the Spurs players who have been damaging my rank over the past couple of weeks. But that's where we're at. We'll reflect more on it in my team selection video later on in the week. However, I do have 4 transfers this week, having rolled my transfer this week. Potentially the double swap of Bukayo Saka in for Bruno Fernandes and downgrading Gyökeres to someone like a Woltemade would have been the option that I should have gone with. But I also have an eye on Mateta, who I probably wouldn't have gone with if I was making a forward transfer this week. So maybe it's better that I've hold off. We've also had a blank again from João Pedro. He was quite involved in the Chelsea performance, but not really so much from an FPL point of view. I do think that in some of the upcoming games, we might see a start for Mark Guiu in that number 9 spot, which will see João Pedro drop back into sort of the number 10 position, which I actually think benefits him as a player. I think it suits his playstyle better, and hopefully it will lead to a few more FPL returns for him. He's definitely been frustrating though, looking at my lineup overall. So I did consider a transfer going into game week 8 of buying Enzo Fernandez in place of Stack, but of course he missed out completely, and going into the deadline, it didn't look good enough to consider buying him unless we got some news, and there wasn't anything in the build-up. He wasn't pictured in training, he wasn't pictured doing any of the sort of pre-game warm-up or anything like that, or getting to the stadium with the Chelsea team. And Enzo Maresca has said already that he is uncertain if he's going to be available for the match against Ajax midweek in the Champions League, which makes him still a doubt for game week 9 in the Premier League. I do still have my eye on him alongside Ismail Assar and Bukayo Saka as potential midfielders I'm looking to buy, and that is where I'm looking this week, but I would need to see some positive confirmation that Enzo Fernandez is going to be back available for Chelsea before I can go and buy him this week. So looking at my team, I do have David Raya in goal. I would still prefer Timber in my defense. I could make a double swap of something like Raya to Pope and a Tarkowski to Timber to give myself the Gabriel Timber combination that I really like and would have gone with on wildcard if I'd have wildcarded in game week 8. Unfortunately, I went a couple of weeks earlier, went with David Raya. Still pretty happy with him though. They look incredible defensively. I'm just quite happy I haven't sold him and not replaced him. I think double Arsenal defense just looks like the most sensible and best place to be long term with the underlying data they've got defensively. I do think I would prefer the double defense, and I do have a look at some potential transfer combinations that could involve selling Raya, as I said, to someone like a Pope and upgrading a defender to someone like a Timber if I wanted to. But of course, I now have Anderson flagged, which could be a slight issue for me. I don't need him in game week 9. He's currently on my bench away at Newcastle. Apparently it's a slight strain to his hamstring, but only a grade 1 tear, which can be sort of recovered from as soon as 1 or 2 weeks. But I do need him in my lineup in game week 10. He has Wolves at home. So an injury update to him will also impact what I want to do with my transfers, because if he's available, then I might be able to sell someone like a Tarkowski. But if I am going to need Tarkowski for the next few games, then someone like an Anderson might have to go instead of him. Elsewhere in my defense, Senesi may be a little bit fortunate not to get sent off, but he is available for Forest at home. Of course, Forest will have a new manager. Tarkowski at home to Spurs, Gabriel at home to Crystal Palace, into my midfield, Semenyo at home to Forest, Iliman and Dye at home to Spurs, Fernandes at home to Brighton, João Pedro at home to Sunderland up front, Gyökeres at home to Crystal Palace, and then Haaland and Reinders. I think generally my team actually looks all right going into game week 9 on paper. I just think there are a couple of issues that I would like to deal with either this week or going forward. Stack is also one. I've been saying over the past week or so during the international break that I didn't like him as a pick. The DEFCON's not there, the lack of set pieces, the early subs, and we saw that again being taken off just after the 70th minute. So if I did roll my transfer, which is a possibility, I think I would probably play Reinders over him. I think generally that last midfielder spot is where my biggest weakness is. And I don't think I want to play a back four either. There is a little bit of discussion about whether we should consider playing a back four. But when I've got Anderson as a flag away at Newcastle and I've got Richards away at Arsenal, I don't really want to sub any of them in to play a back four. So it's either Reinders or Stack. But that last attacker spot feels like my biggest weakness in my starting lineup. Reinders, of course, with the early sub. And I said over the international break that I don't mind keeping Reinders, but I think he needs to be a 8th attacker rather than a 7th attacker, which he is in my lineup, and I imagine a lot of your teams as well. So the plan for me would either be in the next few weeks to sell Reinders and to sell Stack, or to sell Stack to someone significant enough that would knock Reinders down from being my 7th attacker to my 8th attacker and give myself a bit of better depth. Because some of the fixtures for City over the next few are quite difficult. I don't want to play Reinders in them all, but actually some of the better ones from about game week 12, 13 onwards, I would quite like to have him back for. So actually, defensively and in goal, I don't mind the way that my team is lining up. Tarkowski against Spurs isn't ideal, but it is a home fixture. Spurs play in the Champions League, and he's pretty good for DEFCON. Fernandes, Semenyo, and Dye, I don't mind. I am going to keep João Pedro. I might look to move him on in game week 10 when he goes away to Spurs, but I don't plan on selling him for Sunderland at home. The two main forwards that I like the look of are Woltemade, who plays Fulham and is probably, on more form than you get from João Pedro. But the other one is Mateta, and he goes away to Arsenal this week. And as much as João Pedro is frustrated, his underlying data has not looked good, his attacking returns have not been there, I still would prefer João Pedro over going for someone like Mateta. And that is probably a similar thing when we look at Gyökeres. Palace at home this week is not great, but he does play Burnley and Sunderland in 2 of the next 3 after that. But again, if I'm going to sell him, I do think Mateta is the number one replacement that I like. And he goes away to Arsenal this week, the best defence in the league. So I would prefer to have Saka over Gyökeres, absolutely. Saka got a 7-pointer with no attacking returns, with a clean sheet point, 2 bonus points, and defensive contributions. But I don't think it's necessarily worth a couple of transfers, especially given that I held Bruno through the Liverpool game. And just after recording that first section, I checked my phone and Bruno Fernandes has just missed apparently a big chance. I don't know quite how big it is. I haven't watched it, but that is the live of a Bruno Fernandes owner in terms of potential replacements for these players going forward. So Anderson is only in here if he's out for a long term. Tarkowski, I just think he's slightly too expensive. Stack and Bruno Fernandes, I plan on holding Iliman and Dye. And then Gyökeres up front, I don't think he's worth the money. There are better Arsenal players, and I would sell him before I'd consider selling João Pedro. In terms of the defenders, I like going to Dan Burn. I think Newcastle defensively look good. I could also do David Raya to Pope or David Raya to Sanchez. If I was to sell Raya to free up the Arsenal spot there to buy someone like a Timber, I would look at Sanchez as Pope as the best 2 options. Burn I like as an alternative in the defence. He is playing a lot of minutes at left back at the moment, which is not great for his defensive contribution ability. It's slightly better for his attacking returns, but some of the upcoming fixtures are pretty nice with them, including Fulham at home in game week 9. Then it is Timber. I've spoken about him as probably my second favourite Arsenal defender behind Gabriel. I still would pay the money for Gabriel. He's just so reliable and he's such a threat from set pieces, which is where Arsenal get an awful lot of their goals from. And then it's Van Dijk. I do not plan on buying Van Dijk over the next few weeks until at least after the next international break. But from game week 13 onwards, the Liverpool fixtures do look really good, and I do think I'll want a piece of it. And if I'm not necessarily going back to someone like a Gakpo or a Salah, having someone defensively could be the way to go, although the way they're defending at the moment, he's probably not worth the money. The other one is downgrading him to Rodon, which I still think is the most likely transfer I'll make this week if Anderson is close to being back and if Enzo Fernandez is available. Something like a Tarkowski down to a Rodon to do Stack up to Enzo Fernandez, which I spoke about last week, is still probably the most likely scenario transfer-wise for my team. But if I had the money, Timber and Burn are definitely defenders I wish I could be buying into my team. And I've got 4 free transfers, so there is a way that I could be a little bit more flexible if I wanted to, but I don't think I want to rush into using lots of them this week when I do plan on doing transfers like Gyökeres to Mateta further down the line. Into midfield, Stack and Bruno. In terms of those replacements, it's someone like a Saka. I would probably have to sell Bruno if I wanted to buy Saka, and I don't think that's a transfer that I'm ruling out. I still think any week now I could decide that, enough is enough with Bruno Fernandes and I could take him out for Bukayo Saka, but having held him through that Liverpool game, he's now got Brighton at home where Saka plays a Crystal Palace team. Although they just conceded 3, we generally associate Crystal Palace with a pretty good defensive side, and in order to do that, I would probably have to sell Gyökeres because I much prefer double Arsenal defense to double Arsenal attack. There are lots of good attackers who I think can get close to a Gyökeres, who can get close to a Eze, a Rice, a Saka, but I don't think the defense will be matched by any other club. So I like the double defense. So if I'm going to sell and get Saka, it would be selling Gyökeres, which I don't think I'm going to do this week because the forward I want to buy most is Mateta. Mateta versus Woltemade is one of the biggest questions being asked at the moment. Now, Jarrod Bowen is still to play on Monday night, and he may well put himself back in the conversation. So Bowen, Mateta, and Woltemade are all 3 forwards I really like. Mateta is my favourite, though. I know it's a bit of recency bias that he just scored a hat-trick, but I do feel like he has a little bit more haul potential. A lot of what Crystal Palace does goes through him, whereas I'm not sure I expect Newcastle to score quite as many goals, and Woltemade is a great finisher and he's on great form, and I wouldn't put anyone off buying him, but I think I prefer Mateta out of the 2 long term, but I don't think I need to buy Mateta this week. Other midfielders, if I wanted Crystal Palace, instead of going Mateta, I could go Sarr in my midfield, but I think I prefer Enzo Fernandez to Sarr, and I think I prefer Mateta to Sarr if I had to pick between them. So that's probably the way that I'm leaning. Of course, if I don't think Gyökeres is worth the money, there is also a slight doubt in my mind about whether Saka is definitely worth the money. Let's say he didn't take the penalty last week and he's had no open play returns in the past couple of games. Someone like a Declan Rice could be an alternative at Arsenal. I do still think I want a triple up on Arsenal. I just wonder if someone like a Rice at a cheaper price could get close enough to Saka to be close in terms of value. So answering some of your early questions going into Game Week 9, a lot of it is discussed in the previous section in the sort of players I'm considering buying if you're looking at forwards and stuff like that. So do check out that section if you haven't. First one is, do I think Enzo Fernandez will play? My current prediction is yes. I feel like he was quite close to playing this one. He's still in contention at the moment to play the Ajax game midweek. So I am hopefully is back for the Sunderland at home game, but I definitely wouldn't be buying him until at least after the Champions League game to see if he's in the squad, to see what Maresca says, because we'll get a press conference pre-Champions League, we'll get a sort of any photos after the Champions League, and then we will get a press conference on Friday before the Premier League game. So we will get lots of updates from Chelsea, and we should get a pretty reliable news from Maresca about whether he's in contention to being back available. I do think he probably will be. It doesn't sound like it's something that's going to keep him out for very long, but one to keep an eye on. Next up is sell João Pedro or hold for Sunderland. If you are so fed up to him, then you can go to someone like a Woltemade or to a Jarrod Bowen. But if you are like me, that you think Mateta is the best forward you want to buy, I would keep him for Sunderland. And even to someone like a Woltemade or a Bowen, I would probably give João Pedro this Sunderland at home game. And if he blanks again, then maybe it's time to get rid of him. He's not getting enough chances and there are other Chelsea players we can pick from, but I would recommend keeping for the Sunderland game. Next up is, what should you do with Reinders? Start, sell, bench, Reinders. With the upcoming fixtures that you can see here for Manchester City, I don't think we want to be starting Reinders every week. Now, maybe there's a little bit of returning from international duty with lots of games coming up that led to the early sub, but it is quite frustrating. I don't think I need to sell him unless you don't have a sort of 7th or 8th attacker that you could play over him. But I do think moving him to an 8th attacker, just benching him is probably what I'm going to do and probably my suggestion. Next up is buy Mateta, even though there's Arsenal away this week. As I spoke about with my team, the answer to that would be no. I would probably wait until after the Arsenal game. Arsenal look too good defensively to buy an attacker against. I would keep someone like a João Pedro. I'd keep a Gyökeres, despite how disappointing they've been, and buy Mateta as a great option going into game week 10. Is triple Arsenal defence a possibility instead of having a Gyökeres, instead of having someone like a Saka or a Rice in your midfield? It is as a long-term play, but I do think there are lots of nice cheap options that can get good defensive contributions that are also good long-term. So I do think a double up on the Arsenal defence is enough, but I wouldn't necessarily put you off a triple up for the short-term fixtures that they've got, but it's probably not worth it because that goal they concede when they do will be very, very painful. And then having a look at Spurs, is it time to sell them? Now, I feel like I've spoken about Kudos and about Spurs quite a lot. The upcoming fixtures do get a little bit more difficult for them. So they've got Everton, Chelsea, Man United, Arsenal, Fulham, and Newcastle in all of their next 6. To be honest, Everton away, Chelsea at home over the next couple, and even Man United, the one after, is not the end of the world, particularly for someone like a Kudos and an attacker. Defensively, I would be looking to move off. We don't know what happened to Romero that much in the warm-up. That will impact them defensively. They do start to play a lot of fixtures. Richarlison is a minutes risk, as we've seen over the past couple of games. I would look to move off all of them, apart from maybe Kudos, who is still involved. He did score. It got ruled out for offside. He put in the cross, which led to the first goal, which was squared by Palhinha. He is still very involved in every single thing that Spurs do. Every single chance they create, he is still having some involvement in. So outside of him, I would look to sell. Kudos, I probably wouldn't be buying new still. That is probably my recommendation, but I think you can hold on to him if you own him. And the final one is, should we be considering playing a back four more often than we are? The answer is probably yes. I still don't think with my team that it has worked very much over the past couple of games if I'd have played a back four. But if you do have 4 defenders or even 3 good defenders and you're considering a difficult fixture for an attacker or a half-decent fixture for a defender, we should much more often be looking to play the back four just because that base points with DEFCON particularly is definitely higher. So going back to my team, the transfers that I want to make over the next few weeks is probably selling Gyökeres. The only issue is he does have Burnley and Sunderland in the 2 games after Palace, and I would want triple Arsenal for those games, but Mateta is definitely the forward I want to buy. The issue is he goes away to Arsenal next week. So I would probably wait and do that transfer in game week 10 or slightly later. The other thing is I want to upgrade my 7th/8th attacker. I want to upgrade Stack in order to be able to move Reinders to be my 8th attacker. However, how do I free up the money to do that? Now, Gyökeres down to someone like a Mateta gives me the money to do Stack up to Enzo Fernandez. And that is 2 transfers I really like. And it would allow me to keep Tarkowski going forward. But the issue is I don't really want to buy Mateta this week. I'd rather buy him going into game week 10 or onwards. And I don't know if Enzo Fernandez is going to be available. The other option I've got to do Stack to Enzo Fernandez is to do Tarkowski down to Rodon. So I would say those are probably the 2 transfer combinations that I am really looking at this week. I have considered again doing Raya to Pope and Tarkowski to someone like a Timber. And if I don't want to buy Enzo Fernandez this week, I could end up doing something like that. So a lot of what I'm doing does depend a little bit on the likes of Anderson on my bench, because if he's unavailable, I might need to keep hold of Tarkowski. But if he's going to be available soon, then I can probably sell Tarkowski slightly more easily. And then it's, what do I do in order to do the Stack up to Enzo move? Do I do Gyökeres to Mateta to give me the money but play Mateta away at Arsenal? Or do I do Tarkowski down to Rodon? Those are the 2 transfers, I think, which are much, much the most likely in order to free up the money to do Stack to Enzo Fernandez. But if Enzo Fernandez is not available, then I can just keep Tarkowski and I'd probably keep Gyökeres for this week, despite what I am seeing from Gyökeres in particular. And I'd either roll my transfer or I'd look at doing that couple of swaps from Raya to a Timber, for example, going into this week, particularly because buying a Pope or even buying a Dan Burn at home to Fulham this week does feel like quite a good transfer. So we're going to wrap it up there. That's really what I'm thinking about for my team. It is a slightly longer-winded. I need to wait and see what's happening with the likes of Enzo Fernandez in particular, with the likes of Anderson also in my team. How do some of the players get on in Champions League football, in Europa League and Europa Conference League, which all take place during this midweek? Because, of course, if you're looking to buy Mateta, they do play in the Europa Conference League on Thursday before the game against Arsenal over the weekend. So there is quite a fast turnaround for Crystal Palace between their next couple of games, which is also something to consider. So as I said, if Enzo Fernandez is likely to be available for Sunderland at home, I definitely think I will likely buy him in place of Stack, and I will either downgrade Tarkowski to Rodon or Gyökeres to probably Mateta in order to free up the money. I could downgrade Bruno to someone else in order to free up some money, a slight consideration. This would give me the ability to bench Reinders. Rodon would come in at home to West Ham, despite how poor I think Leeds were in game week 8. And then, of course, I would drop Reinders to the bench and start Enzo Fernandez in his place in midfield at home to Sunderland over him. So a lot of what I'm doing revolves around Enzo Fernandez. I did want him in game week 8. I do really want him going forward, particularly with Palmer out for a long time. I like the minutes going forward. And if you watch the Chelsea highlights, look at some of the positions that someone like a Andre Santos got into. If Enzo Fernandez is in those same positions, I'm sure the returns are hopefully going to be there. For transfers, it definitely feels like there are some things I want to change, but I need to wait on a bit of injury news and some European football midweek. Hopefully that's a little bit of use to you with questions and also general players that I'm considering buying. I think Gyökeres is just not worth the money. It's just at which window I sell him with Palace, Burnley, Sunderland in the next 3 games between now and the next international break. Anyway, let's wrap it up there. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday evenings. If you've got West Ham and Brentford players on Monday night, good luck to you. Good luck with the rest of the game week. Thank you all for watching. Any questions you have early on, drop them in the comment section down below. I'll do my best to make sure they're answered in the rest of the videos throughout the week. 2,000 likes is the aim. Subscribe if you are new, and I'll be back again very soon.